Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Bartz. Today, we have a quick session on the digital divide and what that is and how we can begin to close that gap. To really dive deeper into this, we have to start with defining the digital divide and what that phrase actually means. So, just one definition that I've come across is a difference in access to technology between nations, regions, and based on demographic factors such as income, race, and age. And to kind of dive deeper into that, it doesn't have to be quite as broad as nation to nation or region to region. It can be much on a much smaller level. Think in terms of a school, it can be neighborhood to neighborhood. So just be sure to understand that it doesn't have to just be, third world country versus the developed world. It can be on a much smaller, more local scale. But really, the emphasis is on that gap. There's that gap between the access to this technology based on lots of times it's going to be based on that income, race, or age, and we'll get into some of the factors that kind of play into all three. As you dive into the digital divide and really begin examining it, you start to come across some common themes, some common elements, or as you can see here, common keys, some things that are kind of prevalent no matter who's discussing the digital divide. These things begin with assumption. So, what is assumption? That's assuming that people have technology, they have the internet, things of that nature. Then we have access. So, once again, it's thinking people have broadband internet. They have um, they have the literacy to understand the digital world and how it works and how to navigate things of that nature. Then we have quality. Again, what kind of internet are people using? What kind of devices do people have? So those three things are kind of common across any platform or information that you read about the digital divide. So we're going to dive into each one of these, starting with assumption. First key concept within the digital divide, we have assumption. So let's dive right in and see what assumption means as it pertains to digital divide. Um, Everyone has the internet. This is assumption number one. We see it all over the place in education, particularly um, while students may have access to the internet while they're in the classroom. When they go home, that may not always be the case. Um, and again, we've kind of gotten to the point in the 21st century world where this assumption is very real and is across the board. Assumption two, everyone has high-speed internet. Again, this is not always the case. If you don't have high-speed internet, your capabilities on what you can do are very limited on the web. Everyone can navigate the internet. This is a big one, and I think kind of one of the most overlooked assumptions, but it is very existent in the world, and that's just assuming that everyone has a literacy and an understanding of how technology works, how the internet works, how to navigate, how to do so safely. Then we have everyone has the appropriate software. We see this again in education. You may ask as a teacher or a facilitator a lot of a student or to complete a project without really thinking if that appropriate software is available to all of your students. While some may have it, others most likely will not. Everyone has digital security. Again, these are things that all cost money. So does everyone have a secure environment to where they can work and can function and can view the internet? And then lastly, everyone has a computer or a digital device. This isn't always the case. We'll see a little bit later in this presentation how many households kind of in the US still don't have computers and then digital devices. And even if some do just have maybe a mobile device, a smart device like that, a lot of things may not be necessarily made for viewing on a mobile phone. We're on key number 2, and that is access. So let's dive right in. Less than 50% of households living on $20,000 or less have internet. So that's a very large chunk of individuals, um, low income individuals specifically, that don't have internet in their household. And then directly from the United States Census Bureau, we have 8% of American households have no computer. While that may seem like a really small number, if you think back to our assumptions and you're assuming that everyone has one, the internet, and two, a computer, you're still almost at 10% of American households that have no computer whatsoever. Then we have 93% of urban and 89% of rural households use computing devices. So that's 3% higher than households that have no computer at all, don't use a computing device in rural settings. So once again, no access to that internet world, that digital world, for over 10% of rural Americans, and still a fair number of Americans living in urban settings. Lack of literacy. You may have a computer, you may have broadband internet, but can you get the most out of it? Do you know how to find the information that you're looking for? Do you know how to do it all safely? Do you understand the technology that you're using? These are all really, really important factors. Again, you can meet two of the assumptions. You have a computer, you have the internet, but you don't know what you're doing on it. And so that access really isn't true. And then lastly, we have many open source software requires 8 GB of RAM. So really what this is saying is there are some free open source softwares out there that take the place of some of the, pricey products such as, Microsoft Office Suite, things of that nature. But those still, even though there may be minimal or no cost associated with that software, you still do need a fairly powerful device to operate it. And our last key that we're going to dive into is going to be quality. So quality, low-end devices do not function at the same level as newer technologies. So we've all know this technology is rapidly changing, rapidly improving. From one iPhone generation to the next, things can be drastically different. So again, those lower income families that may be underserved with technology may have those lower end devices because that's what they can afford. So they are not going to function at that same level or have those same capabilities as the latest and greatest. Approximately 25% of Americans do not have broadband internet. And for those of you that may have used dial-up early in your lives, that internet is not capable of doing very much. And there are still 25% of Americans who may be functioning at that level or lower without that broadband. So the capabilities are minuscule, not much that they can do with it. They definitely can't be streaming videos from an educational perspective. They may be able to do some basic Google searches, but not a whole lot. The quality of use gap. This is once again kind of talking about that literacy. Do you know how to get everything out of your device that it is capable of or that you need it to? Um, I know for me, for example, I have an iPad, but I do very minimal on it. I don't maximize uh, its capabilities whatsoever because I don't really know how to. Um, and so that's really what this quality of use gap is. And then we also have many Americans are phone dependent. So there's some governmental programs that are out there that may give many Americans access to a mobile phone with 3G, 4G connectivity. And then on top of having that poor connectivity of 3G or 4G, which may or may not even still be supported by many carriers. Again, we're talking about having to do things digitally on a mobile device that's a low end mobile device, especially if you have things that are built specifically for completion on a PC or a Mac. Having to do that on the phone can be very challenging, very difficult. Um, you're not going to be able to do so. And that can be something as simple as filling out a form at a doctor's office before a visit, um, and you're having to do that on a phone with poor connectivity, a small screen, not the highest resolution screen. So really, that can make things very challenging. So now that we've kind of dug in a little bit deeper on the digital divide, what it is, how it affects people, how do we begin to kind of close that gap? Kind of make the technology more diverse, more connected, more accepting of any and all potential users. The first thing that you really need to do is we need to eliminate these assumptions. Again, specifically from an educational standpoint, we can't assume that all of our students have computers, have broadband internet, have the access to the software, um, or the knowledge to navigate the technology that we're asking them to. So, as with anything where assumptions are involved, um, it's not always that simple. You can't make those blanket assumptions. So, it really starts with eliminating those. Secondly, is we have legislation. Um, Really, on our end, there's not a ton that we can do to change legislation, but currently we have the FCC is resistant to aiding the expansion of broadband. They're really trying to rely on the free market, which obviously is being unsuccessful. Profits are going to drive the free market rather than the greater good of our citizens and American people. And currently, there's no real plan in place to kind of broaden everyone's access to the internet. The Obama administration did quote 25 megabits per second is really necessary for someone to have an opportunity to be successful in the 21st century. So we really need to work on kind of pushing that legislation to get everybody the access to the digital world that they need. Next, we have supporting initiatives. There are a ton of initiatives out there. Yeah, read through some articles or do some Google searches, and you can find many of them. Just a couple are Close the Gap Initiative, which is where European companies will donate their old technology, which we know in the business world, old technology is still fairly relevant. Um, and it's not that low end tech. So they donate that, and then that gets placed to houses in need. We have the Wikipedia Foundation, which we've all used Wikipedia. They do a lot for distributing information and keeping it free, which is a really great thing. There's another initiative, the Alliance for Affordable Internet. There are digital literacy programs available out there. And then there's Starlink, which is a satellite based internet that's supposed to be at an affordable cost, which is created by Elon Musk. So lots of initiatives that need as much support as possible. Next, we have infrastructure. This kind of goes back to legislation, where we really need to build up that infrastructure to have all of the households in the United States have access to broadband internet, so that they can have every opportunity to be successful as people who do have easily access or take that access for granted. Um, Next, we have accessibility. So really what this is there needs to be alternatives, especially in education, for accessing information, accessing software, completing assignments. We can't assume in a school setting that, again, everybody has a PowerPoint or a word processor. So what alternatives do they have to complete assignments and turn those in, rather than kind of just not turning it in or feeling like they don't know what avenue they can go down. Um, Next, we have emphasis on literacy. So we need to push kind of technology, internet literacy out there as much as possible. Make sure those resources that are out there on the internet now that are available to users on how to use the internet, how to be computer literate, things of that nature. And then lastly, probably most importantly, is unity of purpose. We need to be united together. That starts with in politics, um, us as those individuals who do have easy access to technology, and may have that literacy. We need to be supporting everything around getting people access and kind of closing this gap. Um, we don't need the divide to be there. So if we're all united on closing that gap, we should have a better chance of success.